so. There's a huge amount of you yet to join, and we're seeing the numbers going up as we speak. My name is Murray Norton. I'm the Chief Executive of the Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and you're very welcome to this webinar today, which is just going to explore the co-funding side of the recent changes we heard yesterday at the press conference. Co-funding 3+, I think we're calling it. I'm claiming responsibility for that one. Graeme smiling to that as well. I'm joined here by the CEO of Jersey Business, Graeme Smith, and also Dave Auffret, who's a senior manager with CLS, Customer and Local Services these days. And me thinking it was a boy band as well. Customer and Local Services, Social Security and Old Money. And Dave has been looking after and will be looking after the mechanism of payments for co-funding, and particularly with co-funding 3 and the detriment, so can explain some of the detail on that. And we are hopeful that we're going to be joined by the Group Director of Finance and Digital, and that is Richard Corrigan, who should be joining us very, very shortly. So we'll look out for Richard joining us in just a second. And for those who've just joined, you'll see that there is a Q&A question at the bottom. A little button down at the bottom that you can see. It says Q&A, and if you've got any questions, then by all means put them through, and we'll see if we can manage them the best way we possibly can. I've had a couple of questions coming in advance, and the original billing of this, and I should just explain this to those who are watching, the original billing was that we would talk about the co-funding and also the health guidelines, the new health guidelines, some of the restrictions on that have changed on gatherings, and also on the licensing hours for hospitality. Now, because the guidelines for that are coming out tomorrow, they come out actually, and they're published tomorrow just after midday. Just before that, at 11 o'clock in the morning, there'll be a webinar on that, and I'll be able to direct you to the link on that a little bit later on. You'll find it actually on the Jersey Chamber website. You'll find it on our social media page right at this moment on Twitter. So we're talking health guidelines tomorrow at 11. Today, we're talking about the co-funding 3+. Graeme Smith, you like me were involved in some of the conversations leading up to this as government officers have been working through how this would happen. It's really been a case that has COVID-19 has changed from where the original tapering off of co-funding is. So if the story's changed and the issue has changed, the story and the narrative has changed as well. So this is based on a sliding scale as opposed to what we had before, which was a flat rate of co-funding. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think in relation to the previous tapering, that was very much geared to expectations in terms of what would happen from a medical perspective. But as we're seeing in terms of the numbers, we're going into a winter phase, which could be quite challenging. Not only for initially the concern was probably more around hospitality in terms of that, so that kind of continues. If you look at how the scheme has evolved, it benefits or it assists those businesses that have had more negative impact. So effectively, the detriment plus 10% reflects the impact on that individual business. So I think it actually, so say for argument's sake, a business which has had 90% reduction in turnover, they will get the level of support in terms of the detriment, so it'll be a maximum of 60%. So what you're starting to see is a more reflective, targeted support mechanism as we get into more detail, which I certainly welcome, and the businesses I've spoken to think strikes the right balance.
In terms of working it out, it's quite an easy thing. If you use it as detriment plus 10%. I want to explain detriment a little bit more with Dave, but is that a good way of explaining it?
Yeah, it is. It's effectively, you need to work out your detriment. You add 10%. The maximum is 60%. There may be some businesses where they would have got more under the tapering system, and if that's the case, they will get what the tapering system says. So think of it as your detriment plus 10% up to a maximum cap of 60%, and it starts to make sense.
Right. Okay. There's plenty of details online, but I'm delighted that Dave has joined us, Dave Auffret, looking after this. The technical side of this, in terms of if you're a business at the moment and you're claiming co-funding, how and when will this change, Dave?
So this will change at the beginning of December for November claims. So the bones of the scheme are the same. The way in which you apply are the same. One of the key changes is we're moving to a monthly detriment test again, rather than the rolling 3 months. We feel that that's fairer as businesses have come through the sort of dark early summer They've had better sort of September and October. So if we were to continue to use 3 months rolling, it would potentially actually negatively affect them in terms of claiming. So 3+ starts with back to being a 1 month detriment test, again using 2019 as a comparator, and that will continue to be the comparator through January, February and March. So we won't be using January 20, February 20 and March 20. It'll still be using what was effectively a normal year in 2019.
So when we do go to, just to reiterate that, once we go into January 2021, seems a long way away, but it's not. We'll be using January 19's figures to base that, offset that against in terms of the detriment.
Yeah, because even though we weren't in the full throes of COVID, business was starting to be affected by people being aware of like not traveling, and other impacts on business. So we think using 2019 is much fairer comparison for people.
Yeah. In working out detriment, Graeme, I'm going to come back to you on this in detriment. Is this a complicated thing for people to work out? Because whilst there will be businesses, and we've talked about this many times, who will be analytical in knowing where they are on every week and every month of the year, there will be other businesses that are so busy running, they don't get a chance to focus on what they took last month. So how complicated is it?
I mean, Dave can talk about practically in terms of the sort of issues and challenges that CLS have faced, but it is important that businesses, as accurate as they possibly can, as early as possible, are able to calculate their turnover, so that they can calculate the detriment. If they make a mistake and when the full information comes through, they'll have to correct that. But for most businesses to actually calculate your turnover is something that we would encourage management to do on a regular basis anyway. So this is something which is good practice. And I think coming out of this crisis, the lessons learned in terms of you having a good grasp early on your financial numbers becomes ever more relevant. So, and again, Jersey Business, we're there to help those businesses that actually there's a real issue in completing the application form process here. We helped on the earlier phases of that. And part of that also is the future planning as well. This allows businesses to start to understand and project forward because they've got a clarity of the government support through to March now. And it's important that they use that period. We can help, and we'll talk about a business health check and what have you. But it's relatively straightforward, but I'd encourage all businesses to keep on top of that as early as possible. Dave, I don't know if you want to speak from experience in terms of.
We've reached out to about 50% of the businesses that have claimed under the scheme over the course of sort of April through to October, and the number of firms that are finding it difficult to calculate turnover is actually not as bad as we were initially thinking. So I think the challenge is for people to find the time to get these numbers and actually gather the information. I think, as Graeme said, the sooner they do it, the better. Obviously now, and with the last couple of months, people need to put in what their turnover is to calculate their detriment when making a claim. So the figures come up on the screen for them. So that's fairly straightforward. So it will make it a lot easier for us to review the figures going forward. But in the main, people are managing to get it done. We are obviously helping where they need it, but yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah, I mean, this is about support and getting that delivery of support out there, obviously, is what you're doing, Dave. I have a question that's come in here that's a bit technical, and I'm going to take this one early in case we have to come back to it. The following statement will need qualifying and quantifying, as the previous rules have been tied into last year's income statement regarding payroll funding. And I'm going to read the statement here. The business must declare that it has reviewed and appropriately reduced director salaries or the owner's remuneration where relevant in context of applying for a taxpayer funded subsidy, and must not increase director salaries or owner remuneration during the life of the scheme. So just in terms of just commenting on that, Dave, I don't know if you can comment on that. Let's just comment about reducing director salaries or owners remunerations where relevant. Does that have an effect on this?
It shouldn't do. What we don't want people to do is falsely deflate salaries to be able to access the scheme. I think that's the key message, where people aren't actually sort of increasing salaries. Again, we don't feel that as a supportive scheme, people should be using the scheme to inappropriately fund business.
Okay, so this really is about people. I say playing the game is probably the wrong term, but this is about people being fair. Yes,
I mean, that's the whole point of this scheme, is to support business and individual sole traders through what are unprecedented times. So we expect everyone to approach the scheme with some honesty, I guess.
So in terms of the question that we've just had in there, businesses must declare if that it has reviewed and appropriately reduced director salaries. That's right. There we go. Graeme, any comment to make on that?
Yeah, I just add on that. I think one of the things we say to all our businesses is you need to look at all your fixed costs across the spectrum of your fixed costs in terms of trying to minimise the negative cash flow that most businesses are experiencing, and that includes director salaries. In terms of is there an ability to take a reduced salary? I think that what that's saying is you need to be looking at all your fixed costs. One of the things we're quite strong on is businesses looking at, say, property costs. And there's been quite a lot of talk in terms of government as landlord and also private sector landlords in trying to have the conversations with the landlords to reflect that if a business hasn't got any revenue, it's very difficult for it to service its rental. A deferral of rental is kicking the can down the road to some extent. So actually, businesses need to look at their fixed costs. And in that respect, the support from government is there to keep people in jobs. And that's what this scheme is critically about.
Yeah. Okay. So fixed costs, looking at all of those, and making sure you're covered right. I just want to go on to the business health check just for a second, Graeme, because that's something that Jersey Business has been doing an awful lot of. What's involved in that? Because we all avoid going for a medical at the best of times. If it's a business medical, we probably avoid it even more. So what's involved in that?
Well, what's involved? It's an opportunity for us to work with the business leader, looking at their current financial position, to look at their forecast financial position, to start to help them plan. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is help the business make good decisions. It's very difficult in a crisis when you're facing circumstances you've not experienced before. And so who do you go to? Do you go to your bank? Well, you may not feel comfortable going to your bank because you're concerned that they might pull the overdraft or concerns around that. It's probably not the case, but you need that sounding board that is independent, is confidential, and we provide that service. And we've had a lot of experiences over the last 6 months of how we can support those businesses through this very difficult period. So I really would encourage, particularly small business owners, to look at straight on. It's on our website. They can see the format of it. It is confidential, but it's to help them make better decisions and help them make more informed decisions. We've got a team of advisors who, as I say, have worked across sectors with different businesses. We see best practice, and we're trying to help share that. So it is something which we're seeing a big uptick in. It's something which I think are very much built into our 2021 planning, because businesses then start the replanning, the remodeling, and that's a key part of it in understanding the financial dynamics, the financial forecasting. Sometimes that's, for a lot of business owners, that they tend to get to that last, whereas the crisis has taught us we need to understand the cash and the cash generation.
Right. Okay. So this is just a way of I mean, this is the perfect help at the perfect time for businesses.
It is, and it's through the crisis, but it's also in terms of looking, what does the future look like? So it's the first part of the conversation, one to get through to the end of March. Then it's a case of actually, what are the lessons learned? What are the efficiencies? What are the technology advancements which may help your business? So it will grow into more support to help that business start to replan and rebuild.
Okay. David, in terms of, you said the co-funding is pretty much the same as it was previously. It's just a different mechanism of working how much it is. Are there any other changes that we should look at here in the co-funding, or is it pretty much just the sliding scale?
So I think one of the messages need to get out is obviously it's detriment plus 10% is what people will get, but to avoid a sudden drop off, even if someone's detriment is only 20%, 21%, they'll get the minimum 40% for November and December, as the scheme had previously been set out. So then, if you've got a detriment of 35%, you'd get 45%. So it's much more incremental. So that's much fairer, much better.
Mm-hmm.
As Graeme's touched on, continues to be capped at 60% of £2,000, so £1,200 per employee. Sole traders, the same rules as last time for applying. So it's average earnings of 2019 that we'll be looking at them using. As I mentioned earlier, 2019 will remain the comparator going forward. One of the other things to be mindful of is that the refund is capped at the maximum detriment level. So you can't get more co-funding than the detriment your organisation has suffered. But that's there's just a few extreme, like when I say extreme, at the end of the spectrum, firms that have had a real crash of earnings, where that would affect them. But I think they're the key messages.
Excellent.
So again, the core application process remains the same, and we've just tried to make it actually fairer given the change that we're all seeing in terms of increased evidence of COVID in the community.
Thanks, Dave. And we'll keep that message going out. In the meantime, Richard Corrigan has joined us from the Government of Jersey, Group Director of Digital and Finance, or Finance and Digital, whichever way around you want it. Richard, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today. Richard, in terms of reaching this point of co-funding 3, I'm right in the assumption that the reason for doing this is that COVID-19 has changed in its direction in another twist and turn that has meant that we've needed to put more support in.
Yeah, so first of all, Murray, sorry for the delay in joining. Restrictions on our IT here at government, so I've joined on the iPad. Yes, there has been unfortunately a shift in direction in terms of COVID, where we had expected in phase 3 of payroll to be tapering the level of support based on what we expected to see as better business performance as we headed in through the winter period, which, although traditionally quieter in many sectors, would have been a return to some degree of normality. With rising infection rates and the need to continue with the health-led approach of restrictive measures, we've had to look at payroll again to ensure that we offer islanders and businesses the right level of support for the circumstances.
So it's been a pretty quick turnaround on this, hasn't it? Because I think this has probably taken just a couple of weeks to change this around. So this is an embellishment on what we've already had. So fast moving by government.
Yeah, very fast moving. I think Dave Auffret had hair at the start of doing these payroll schemes. But no, the team at Customer and Local Services, my own team here, and colleagues in Treasury and Resources have worked together exceptionally well, often late nights and at weekends, to make sure we get this scheme out as quickly as possible and that we give clarity to as many people as we can, just as soon as we can.
I'm glad you've joined us, because the co-funding is one side of this, and we'll keep that rolling, because obviously people have joined us to find out how the co-funding will affect them. And there is, I know on the government website there's a really good sliding scale, which is quite easy. It's detriment plus 10%, and they can work out what they're eligible for. Around that, we also heard yesterday, and I don't expect you to talk too much about the events and attractions side of funding, but there is a separate scheme, which is the Visitor Accommodation Support Scheme, VAS.
Yep.
Can you give us a little bit of detail on that? Because that's quite important for a large sector.
Yeah, so what we'd envisaged with COVID is a 3-winter scenario. So we'd had the winter of 2019-20. We had a summer season that in many respects for hoteliers and self-catering providers felt like a winter period with only a couple of months of acceptable business levels for the time of year. And then what we thought was going to happen is go into another more traditional winter period. Unfortunately, the months that lie ahead of us look a bit more like a nuclear winter than a conventional seasonal winter. and we've seen air routes beginning to ebb away over recent weeks, and that's meant the impact to accommodation providers has been significant. And they just don't have the fat within the business to carry them through this really challenging winter period. But we want them to be with us in spring 2021 when we hope for better times for a number of reasons. With vaccines making good progress, we hope people will have greater confidence and ability to travel, and we need to protect our tourism infrastructure in the meantime. And that really was the genesis of the Visitor Accommodation Support Scheme. It's there to protect bed stock and help to ensure that accommodation providers will be with us still in spring 2021 to welcome guests back through their doors again in more meaningful numbers.
In terms of what and I'm sure most of those visitor accommodation sites will know exactly what they're getting, but what are they getting, just for the interest of the rest of us?
So what we've done is assessed a level of detriment business by business, and from that the business owner will be able to work out the multiple of a certain amount of money per night multiplied by the number of rooms in their establishment, and that will drive to a figure that they can get through the scheme on any one monthly claim. In terms of designing the scheme behind the scenes, we worked with the Hospitality Association, with Jersey Business and indeed with Chamber to try and get information out of accommodation providers to understand a bit more about the fixed costs within their business, on the basis that payroll will help to cover a lot of their variable costs on staffing. This would cover some other aspects such as interest payments on loans, rent, equipment financing, utilities, licenses, and so on. So depending on the level of detriment, that will trigger entry to the scheme or not. We're conscious that some accommodation providers at the lower end of the market in terms of number of rooms that they have, for example, a small B&B, they may be trading okay because they may have some contract workers that are doing, site construction, for example, and they're filling their 5, 7, 10 rooms quite comfortably. But some of the larger establishments are much more dependent on visitors. I've had a really hard time of it. So the scheme could see some of those establishments being paid out, £30,000-40,000 a month to help offset some of that fixed cost burden.
Right. Thank you for that. And there are details of the Visitor Accommodation Support Scheme already out to most of those people, and it's up on the website as well, isn't it?
Yes, it's on the website. We've shared that through the Hospitality Association as well. And thanks to everyone who's been involved in providing information to us to help with the scheme design.
Okay. I've got a question about hotels coming in just a second and co-funding. I said I wasn't expecting you to talk about events and attractions, but is there any news on what funding and when that will be available, or when the details will anyway?
So I'm hoping we'll be able to communicate some more details on that by the end of this month at the very latest. We are working flat out with Jersey Business and with colleagues in government to sign off the final business case with our colleagues in Treasury, have an allocation of money. But what we'd be doing in the meantime, if Graeme's not already mentioned this, is encouraging businesses in that sector to be making appointments with the advisory team at Jersey Business and going through the necessary number crunching. That helps in two ways. It will help with access to the scheme because it is a pre-existing requirement to access the scheme that you've met with Jersey Business, but it will also help in other ways just in terms of the practical advice and support that Jersey Business can signpost for business owners in the sector.
Is it difficult, and I'll go to Graeme in just a sec, is it difficult to ring fence that because it's not quite a sector, because it's attractions, it's events and events organisers, if you like, and I think there's some tour operators. It's a difficult one to fence around, isn't it?
It is. It's a bit of a sort of waifs and strays, if you'll sort of pardon that expression, in that it's an assortment of businesses that haven't quite had the support, but equally have been disrupted by either reduced visitor numbers and or the restrictive measures that we've had to put in place during the COVID pandemic. So this is a means of getting support out to them. It's later than for some other sectors, and I'm sorry that that's the case. But we've tried to help as many as we can, as quickly as we can. And that's why we're now coming down to getting this scheme signed off, hopefully in the next couple of weeks at the very latest.
Graeme, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just kind of echo what Richard said. I mean, I'll probably say a little bit more in terms of the collaboration here, in the sense that the scheme that's always been most advanced is the accommodation scheme. And with the GHA, with yourself, with the business leaders, there's been a lot of really good cooperation. Government I can say this, government genuinely listened to the industry in terms of the nuances, and so that the scheme that comes out is as clear as possible. And as Richard said, it's about ensuring we have the quality bed stock, so that when we come out of this, be it in March 2021 or whenever, that we have the high quality stock. And if you follow that through, in addition to the bed stock, it's critical that we have the right sort of events organisers, because it's a big part of there's no point having beds if the beds are empty. So it's trying to ensure that our visitor economy, if you like, we have the critical infrastructure there. It's more complex to do that once you spread it beyond accommodation, because there's a clear categorization that you can, in terms of the various accommodation providers. It's not the same in events. It's not the same in some of the other industries. So there's a little bit more work required to try and get that right. It's frustrating, but to be fair, the number of schemes which officers have delivered through in the last 3-4 weeks is phenomenal. So we will get there. It will just take a little bit longer. And again, we're working as a business, we're working with the events groups to try and keep them as updated as possible. The business health check will very much form part of this as a package. And as I alluded to before, that is around helping the business look at its whole fixed costs to ensure that actually it's in a strong position come March 2021. So that will be very much more kind of a part of that process.
Right, thank you for that. And for those who joined us and thinking that we might talk about the new restrictions about gatherings and the new restrictions regarding licensing, we're doing that tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning. Our colleagues, or the colleagues of government, should I say, and Richard's colleagues and Dave's colleagues in Department of Health are working very hard to make sure those guidelines are finalised. They'll be launched at midday tomorrow. At 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, we'll have a webinar with Martin Knight, who will be talking his way through that with us. And we're doing that at 11 o'clock tomorrow. So if you want to talk about restrictions or new restrictions that are coming in and gathering and licensing, then tomorrow we'll walk through the practicalities of all of that. Fiona sent us a question in, which I think is quite relevant, and I think possibly one for all of you here, but certainly Richard, wondering if there's any thoughts on the January-February co-funding support for those businesses where the revenue is usually very low in any case, no matter which year you're talking about, if it's 2019, 20, and therefore they might not meet the 50% detriment test. So it may be more worthwhile not trading for those months. Some businesses will really struggle with that 60% support, as there's simply not enough revenue generated in these months, and there has been such a detriment in the preceding 10 months, the business cannot afford to not have the 60% support. So if you can see what that is, also the latest restrictions are causing cancellations of parties over 20, and others are getting nervous now. This means we have a lot. We're having to look at not only refunding these customers, but also trying to survive the winter. So Richard, any thoughts on that? Because that is a difficult situation. If you're normally not earning at this time of the year, January, February anyway, or you're not earning very much, you won't have the detriment, will you?
I mean, the way things are looking at the moment, we're seeing hoteliers suffering detriment, this month and forecast again for next month, just simply because we have a de facto closure of our borders. We've not officially closed them from a public health perspective, but because of the challenging situation in the UK with the number of red zones and amber zones, people have effectively cut off travel outbound from the UK. So businesses are suffering detriment now. In putting these schemes in place, they are there to support visitor economy assets and employees of those businesses. And if we get to that point and we see that the scheme isn't quite triggering the level of support, we are happy to take a look at that. But trying to design a scheme that covers every possible scenario is impossible. And Graeme's nodding because he's been with us on this journey. I touched on it earlier. We're trying to help as many as we can, as quickly as we can. There may just be some outliers at the margins, and if there are, I know that the Minister is very committed to ensuring that we deliver support across the sector where we reasonably can. Obviously, on the flip side, we've got to justify the use of your money as taxpayers as well. So it's how we strike that balance appropriately and helping get support out the door, but also helping to ensure that taxpayers' money is invested wisely.
I guess that's why you've got two schemes there. You've got one which is for visitor accommodation, and co-funding, which is about the amount of employees that you would have. And if you didn't have any employees in January and February, normally anyway, that's what the co-funding points towards. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and of course, what we'll have to look at is if hotels are resourcing up ahead of the spring season next year, to make sure that the schemes we have in place are taking account of that staffing up, so that hotels can hit the ground running, rather than have an excessive hangover from a challenging winter period.
Yeah, Graeme.
Yeah, just quickly, it is important that businesses look at both the terms of both schemes, because they don't exactly match. Particularly, I mean, I think Fiona mentioned 50% detriment on co-funding, whereas in reality it's 20% detriment, and it's plus 10% on that. The 50% is in relation to the accommodation scheme.
Yeah.
So it is important they look at both areas of it in terms of that. But as Richard said, and I can kind of confirm that if we look at the previous iterations of the support schemes, where there's been individual situations which merited support but fell foul of some of the conditions, we and you, Murray, through Chamber, have fed that into government, and that's how phase 2, phase 3 plus adapts. So there's a genuine desire to support the businesses here. To get this out, we have to set some rules around it. If there are the outliers, as Richard commented, we will try and help those in dealing with that.
Yeah, we'll try and pick them up within the various organisations and of course as well. Am I right in thinking that visitor accommodation support will come through, Dave? Is that coming through you as well?
Yes, it is.
In terms of the payment side of that. So is there anything technical that we need to know about that? Because it is slightly, it's different and it's specific to one sector.
Yeah, we're going to have an online form similar to the co-funding application form. We're anticipating that going up on Monday. Very simple, very straightforward. Instructions will be on the form as well. So it'll be quite easy for people to complete. If they've been using the co-funding form, it's quite intuitive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and again, once we get the detail by the end of the month on the events and that side of it, again, the similar sort of thing, presumably you'll be rolling it out very similar along the same sort of mechanism.
That's my understanding.
Excellent. In terms of questions, if anyone does have any questions, and now is your opportunity, because we don't normally get this gathering together just so we can all look at each other. There's always some questions that need to be asked as well. And if you have got any questions, now is the time to be asking of those. Richard, it's very difficult to have that crystal ball and to know where we're going to be into 2021 and heading forward. Is there capacity for more co-funding? Because we do look at March and think, well, by then we'll have vaccinations, by then it'll all be over. We've been saying that quite a bit. So I guess government's got to plan a little bit longer in terms of finances than the next 3 months. And in the back of our minds, we're all worrying that is hopefully the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the start of the pandemic, we've just committed to keep everything under review throughout and in light of changing circumstances. Mm-hmm. So we saw a number of businesses not required to use the payroll scheme, for example, during July and August, because we had healthy visitor numbers in bars, restaurants traded better, not at their optimal levels, and I'm sure not what they'd originally budgeted for this year, but they certainly traded at a better level than would otherwise have been the case. But then coming back into the winter, and again in light of rising infection rates, we flexed the schemes again. So we will keep that under review and see where we get to. Vaccinations, yes, I mean the news there is positive in terms of breakthroughs on I think 2 now of the major virus research programs. But the time it will take to deliver the necessary number of inoculations to the island and then go through a risk-based delivery of that vaccination program. I think we have to be realistic and say that that could take us well into 2021 before we have the majority of the population vaccinated. And of course, for the visitor economy, you're looking at how effectively neighbouring markets have been able to get through vaccination programs as well, because that's ultimately what will inspire confidence from those visitors. I'm also conscious, Murray, that Fiona had raised a point about the number of gatherings, and that was causing some cancellations as well. We do recognise that professionally organised groups coming down from 40 to 20 is a further problem, and informal groups 20 to 10, and particularly coming into the festive season. Again, that was one of the other reasons for triggering this increase in the payroll scheme, and also for making sure that we've got the visitor accommodation scheme working as effectively as possible. We hope that by getting these measures in place now, that we are able to stem the rising infection rates, and certainly to the extent that those exist in hospitality settings, to ensure that there's a limitation of spread, and that prevents any more severe measures being introduced in the weeks or the months ahead.
Okay, question in from Jonathan. Thank you for that, Richard. Hospitality sits alongside tourism and tour operators and air travel. They're all in that genre, and they've all been impacted as a result of COVID-19, and pretty much equally as well. Tour operators, air travel, hotels, you can see the relationship between them all. And the lockdown in the UK, of course, has impacted all of them as well. Will the support offered specifically to hoteliers be extended to support others who have been just as significantly impacted by the downturn? These are those outlying areas outside of hotel, I guess. And I think you'd probably be expecting this. And I think this has always been the cautiousness of government to I don't want to say carve out, but to have specific funding for particular areas of the economy. That's going to be really difficult to manage.
Yeah, so there are no plans at the moment to extend the scheme out across a wider range of economic subsectors. We recognise that businesses have been disrupted to a greater or lesser extent, and we've tried to deliver support where that's been in the most acute form. With hotels, we think there's a significant exception there in terms of a long-term strategic outlook of protecting bed stock for the benefit of our tourism sector in many years to come. And with the high level of fixed costs that hotel business will carry, that there was a special case merited for support. We don't think at this stage that that's replicated to the same extent in every other sector, either in terms of detriment or with that very high level of fixed cost. And also by preserving that hotel infrastructure, say hotel visitor accommodation infrastructure, that preserves the proposition for tour operators and others to be able to market in the years ahead as well.
And in terms of those tour operators and actually airlines as well, are we secure that, I mean, obviously there's been some work going on behind the scenes, are we secure that we're still going to have connections and airlines there come an upturn?
So certainly in terms of Blue Islands, you'll be aware of the funding that we put into Blue Islands to help them on a purely commercial basis with their operations. And you'll recall during lockdown that we supported Blue Islands and supported the island more widely through a lifeline service, initially into Southampton and into Gatwick. And we will restore those lifeline services should the need arise if commercial airlines are switching off routes. I have to say we were very pleased with the very quick restart of routes by BA and EasyJet, BA to Heathrow, EasyJet to Gatwick, but also EasyJet into a number of UK regional airports as well. That coincided with the start of a summer season, and you can understand the visitor demand that existed there. We stand by to help BA and EasyJet and others with that restart process. And Matt Thomas and the team at Ports of Jersey are in dialogue with the airlines almost on a daily basis around the resumption of routes just when market conditions allow.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, thank you for answering that, because it's a bit of a curveball to come in, but I know that there will be other subsectors that will be saying, what about us as well? Yeah, that's always a difficult one.
It is, yeah. I mean, everyone's been challenged to a greater or lesser extent. I think one sector, financial services, has traded reasonably well through this. They've been able to work fairly effectively on a remote basis. but it's not been with that impact either in terms of a hit to their bottom line or some lost revenues off the top line. So we've seen a hit right the way across the economy, and of course, indeed, with government as well in terms of our own income line, in terms of tax receipts.
Yeah, that's a subject for another day, but boy, oh boy,
exactly.
That's going to be a webinar and a half. We look forward to having everybody on for that one. You can escape that one. You'll be all right with that one there. Dave, I'm going to go around the table in terms of final messaging on all of this, because Customer and Local Services is a department which, by the very nature of its name, is customer and local services. So for people to be able to engage with you, is that as easy now as it always has been? How are people being able to do that?
So we're doing the majority of our business over the telephone or online. The majority of forms to access service are online, so it's very much an online or telephone offering. In the instance that someone does need to come into the organisation, we have a booking appointment system. So we're taking people between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. So if they do need to come in, they can go online and book an appointment.
Are you seeing businesses coming in wanting to talk about co-funding or wanting to get help that way? Is that happening at all?
We haven't really seen anyone face to face. It's been very much email and telephone, even through the sort of the audit of the detriment. It's been email, telephone. Obviously, it's fairly easy to have a conversation with someone, explain to them what they need to be providing. Yeah. We're fairly amenable in terms of giving people extra time if they haven't quite understood what's required. And I think that's the thing. I think the key message here is, as coming out from everyone on this call, is we're here to support. So anything they need, phone the helpline. They'll come through to one of my colleagues, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that they're able to access the scheme.
Right, Dave, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for your information you've been given there. And of course, more information is available on the Govt.je website on the Co-Funding3, and we've had that, and we'll make sure that everyone on this call gets those links back out straight after this video call. Graeme, in terms of Jersey Business, this is ongoing work, and you already said 2021. You've got some detail of what your work stream is going to be for 2021, which is going to be continuing, if you like, the health checks and helping businesses be stronger, more resilient. Is that a fair comment on where you're aiming?
Yeah, it is. I think we need to take the learnings from this crisis at an individual business level and ensure that it's an often used phrase, build back better, stronger. But it really does matter. Just on the kind of previous point, a message I would send out from today is to businesses: don't be alone in doing this. In other words, there are Jersey Business are here, chambers there. There's organisations there to help you on this journey. This is something which no one has ever had to deal with in their business careers previously. So do reach out for that support and assistance. You'll get to a better place. It'll help you make better decisions. And the government has targeted the support to enable you to do that. So that's the kind of key message for today. 2021 has to be, let's take the positives. How do we remodel? What opportunities come out of this? And interestingly, we're actually seeing more new business activity or at an early stage. Out of crises often comes innovation and new ideas and new opportunities. So again, that's something which we'll learn from this period and hopefully build on.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much indeed for being there for us today. I really appreciate it. Richard, thank you as always. I no doubt our ongoing discussions between business and between government will continue right up beyond through into the new year. But I thank you very much indeed for talking about Co-Funding3+. Dave, thank you for being with us. Graeme, thank you for being with us. And for everyone watching this, we'll make sure that links go out to everybody that registered for this website, so that you can follow up where you need to on the right areas of the website. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, Murray.
Thanks, Murray. Cheers.